Today we are in Psalm 18, and this is a psalm that was written after David was delivered by God from Saul. So we have studied up to verse 3. I will love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust. My buckler, shield, and the horn of my salvation. There's the gospel. And my high tower. Now we pick it up today in verse 3. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. The sorrows of death compassed me, and the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell compassed me about. The snares of death prevented me. In my distress I called upon the Lord, and cried unto my God, and he heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him, even into his ears. David, throughout this psalm, is bouncing between worship and witness. Just remember those two words, worship and witness. On one hand, he's thanking God and he's worshiping him. His praise is going vertical because he's grateful to God for his deliverance. So verses 1 and 2, I will love thee, O Lord. That's personal, that's that's worshipful. It's David's praise vertical. But then it's almost like he turns away to a reader or to a viewer, and he witnesses. He takes on the role of a witness of God's protection. And that's what happens in verse 3. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. He begins to tell us that he has and he will continue to call upon the Lord. First, because God is worthy of our praise. It means he's deserving of our praise. He is deserving of our worship and our adoration. Nothing else is, by the way, and no one else is in terms of that level of worship and praise. He's worthy of it. He deserves it. But the idea is this God who's worthy of so much praise, his arms are open, his ears are listening, and he's waiting for my call. What a profound thought. And David says, I will call upon the Lord, and so shall I be saved from mine enemies. There is a hint, there's an arrow there at the gospel, because Romans 10 says, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And what is everyone's greatest enemy? Satan and death and sin. And so calling upon the Lord for salvation is the first and foremost application there. But then all the way through life, as you know God, as you know you belong to him, the way of salvation, the way of getting out, the way of deliverance is a better word, the way of either being preserved in and through or from difficult circumstances is to call on the Lord. So maybe you can identify with David's next verses, because he's going to testify of a time that he was very close to death, that he was ensnared and tied up in the ropes or the cords of death, almost like a trap for a bird, a net, or even maybe a noose. So he says in verse 4, the sorrows of death compassed me. The word sorrows there literally are cords, the cords of death, compassed like a trap. The cords of death compassed or encircled me or enveloped me. And the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The picture David's drawing here is it's almost as though he's been tied up by cords and thrown into a deep water, and he's drowning. He's overcome. He's bound up and can't move, and he's drowning. The floods of his enemies, and he's fearful. So he's explaining a situation where physical death was so close, but psychological and emotional distress were overwhelming. And he felt that he was completely helpless. You think about the descriptors of verse 4, verse 5, the sorrows of hell. I think that's the same word. The ropes of the grave, hell, compassed me or ensnared me, encircled me. The snares, there's the idea of a trap again. The snares of death prevented me. So basically, I had lost, is what he's saying. It was over, game over. And one of the takeaways is that when we think it's game over, it's not. that God is still in charge, that he can still deliver us. He can still turn everything around. Hey, didn't the disciples think after Jesus was crucified that it was game over? The story's done, Jesus is dead. But little did they know that God was just beginning the story. This was just the beginning. The death of Christ was the necessary finished work that led to the resurrection. And so it is in our lives. The death of so many things in our lives is the birth, the planting, the springing up of new things. The springing up of God's new plan for us, God's next journey, God's next stage of life. So often the seasons of life feel like death, something's dying, the loss of something, we've lost our whatever we had our identity, our security in, and maybe even we're completely overcome by emotions that are psychologically powerful, like they're going to kill us, or maybe we are physically, being threatened. Maybe you've got some enemies that are physically a threat to you. Well, he says, I will call upon the Lord. He's going to be my deliverance. I'm going to let God fight my battles. I'm going to let God take vengeance. God is the author of all of these circumstances. He can turn this around. I'm going to let God do what only God can do. So he says in verse 6, and this is where we'll end today, in my distress, I called upon the Lord, and I cried unto my God. So David is in terrible distress. He's bound up in a very tight place, is kind of the picture there. And he calls out, he cries out. He lifts up his voice to God. And it says again, he cried. And the word here is to literally yelp for help, to cry aloud or to shout. So David is multiple times in this psalm, he's saying, I lift up my voice, I called out, I cried out, I'm yelling out to God, please help me. I'm sitting in my kitchen right now and I'm looking down on the parking lot of the church, down the hill. And I'll never forget, over on that side of the parking lot, and I've told the story before to our church family several times probably, but there was a long night, one night I took a long walk in the rain, and we were new in Connecticut. And I could identify very much with verses 4 and 5. I felt like God had tied me up in circumstances that were like a straitjacket. No energy, very little health. I didn't have any pre-existing relationships here. The circumstances were dire financially and in every other way. And everybody told me New England was cold and hard and nobody would be saved. And, it was almost like everybody thought I was noble for going to New England. Congratulations, we're happy for you, but, it's going to be really, really bad. Like no one there is going to become a Christian. And I just remember thinking, how is God going to save this church? Because I can't. Kind of like David's wondering by the end of verse 5, how's God going to save me? Now, you think about the calamity, you think about the conflict of the collision of facts that David was experiencing in this moment. He had been anointed as king by the prophet, by God, but he'd never taken the throne. And he's a young man, and now he's going to lose. It looks like he's going to die. He's overcome completely. And imagine the collision going on in David's mind of, I thought this was going to be different. I thought this was going to work out. And he cries out to God in distress. God, what are you doing? How? Please help me, save me, get me out of this. And it's reminiscent to me of that night on the parking lot, because I looked up at that building and I just wept. I just cried. I said, God, I can't do this. You picked the wrong guy. These circumstances are too bad and too difficult and irreversible. And I just cried out. I lifted up my voice, just like David explains. I said, God, this is your building, your church. These are your problems. If you want me to ride over the edge of the cliff with this church and you want it to go down on my watch and me get the blame for it, okay. I surrender to that. If you're breaking me here, okay. But if that's your church and you want to save it, then save it. And do what only you can do. And so I can identify with the distress and calling out to God when you have no other options. In my distress, I called upon the Lord, and I cried unto my God. And I love this. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him, even into his ears. He heard me. David is writing this psalm from a vantage point of knowing that God heard him. Now, when he prayed these prayers, he didn't know God was hearing him. He didn't know if God was hearing him. Maybe by faith he did, but he wouldn't have had a sense of it. And now he's marveling and he's witnessing to us that when we're in distress and we call upon the Lord, God will hear our voice out of his temple, out of his place, his position of authority over the whole universe. My cry matters to him. Wow. My voice matters to him. He heard my voice out of his temple. My cry came before him. Imagine the most powerful man on planet Earth in a throng of people hearing you whisper and stopping everything around him and silencing everybody to say, excuse me, what did you say? That's the picture there. That God, in his majestic authority over all the universe, and his omnipotence and omniscience and omnipresence and his almightiness, he hears even the faintest cry of my voice. He heard my voice out of his temple. My cry came before him, even into his ears. There it is again. He leans in, cups his ears, and says, I hear you, and I'm acting on your behalf. I'm with you. And your cry, your call is an expression of faith and worship to God and dependence, trust in God. And he answers those. He hears those who truly place their trust in him. So I hope you'll take some time today to meditate on verses 4, 5, and 6 and consider how you can call out to God today. Whether you're just looking for direction, wisdom for the next step, whether you're really in deep distress, or whether things are going well, God still wants to hear your voice and he's still worthy of your praise.